Good evening. Well, it's been a while since I did a gun video, and a watcher suggested I remedy that, so I decided to do something I've been meaning to do for a while, and that is compare two very well-known brands of compact semi-auto in a very, very simple range test and just see how they do. We've got the SIG P320, which is a fully striker fire weapon, no exposed hammer, no exposed safety of any kind. And we've got the Glock 19, same thing, no exposed hammer, internal striker fire with a 15 round magazine. This P320 I've had for I think 3 years, has functioned very well for me. I know there's there's been some discussion about the P320 and safety and blah blah blah. I'm not going to rehash that. All I will say is that this particular weapon, for me, through several trips to the range, has functioned fine. I've had no misfeeds. I've had no problems with it. I've had nothing about it that makes me think it will give me any kind of problems. So as far as its functionality goes, I think it's been adequate. The new one to me is the Glock 19 over here, which is, again, similar sized weapon, only 2 less in the magazine. I'm not too concerned about that. Masad Ayub had recently done a video where he called this the Goldilocks gun because it strikes a balance between capacity, size, and reliability and functionality. So I went ahead and picked this up earlier this week. I don't have a ton of Glocks. I do have quite a few Smith & Wesson M&Ps, and I could have put an M&P in here, but I decided, nah, let's go with the SIG and let's go with the Glock. Those are two very, very big names. The SIG especially has gotten a lot of press. Again, there were some problems, but this one has been A-OK for me. And of course, the SIG full size of this was picked to be the Army's new sidearm over the M9. So the full size version of this is what is now issue for the United States Army, which beat out a Glock competitor. However, the Glock 19 reputedly is used by a lot of police departments, comes highly recommended by a great many people. So yeah, we're going to see in this range test how each of these weapons does, and then kind of come back and talk about each one of them a little bit. Now, for the range drill, again, this is very, very simple. The groups are not going to impress anybody. I'm going to tell you that right now. You're dealing with a old, middle-aged chief warrant officer, POG, desk jockey, bad eyes, bad reflexes. I've said all that before in prior videos. I can say the 2 eye surgeries I had last year didn't help things. So, yeah, I'm functioning with somewhat degraded eyesight, shooting right eye. I think my right eye corrected is like 20/30. So these groups aren't going to be amazing. I've gotten things pretty good as far as sight picture and trigger squeeze go. Of course, there's always room for improvement, and I'm sure some of you will let me know that. But mostly I'm looking for the consistency of the groups between the 2 weapons and see how they do. So on the video, you're going to see each weapon used in turn, 2 magazines each with a quick mag change in between. And then I'm going to come back and talk about the guns a little bit, and then you're going to go to a second iteration, pretty much the same drill. I'm just going to reverse the order of the guns. I'm going to go and do the Glock first, and then I'm going to do the SIG, and then when I come back for the next part of it, I'm going to do the SIG, and then I'm going to do the Glock, just to see if there's any difference at all in, shooting one before the other. Does rapid switch over from one weapon to the other make any difference, etc., etc. So, to the range for the first video, and then we'll come back. All right, so there you go. There's pretty much my initial results on the first iteration. Again, I did quick fire, which for me is about a second between. Pretty much just shoot as soon as I could acquire. I know my groups aren't great. You guys can make fun of me for that. That's fine. But they're better than they used to be. Let's put it that way. With some practice and some hard work, I've gotten my groups to be somewhat better. But yeah, surprisingly, the SIG had a somewhat better group. Why the difference? I'm really not sure. Well, okay, I can't say I'm not sure. I think I have some suspicions. So first and foremost is the grip. The grip is a somewhat rounded grip. It molds to the palm just a little bit better than the Glock. One of the fair knocks on the Glock is, of course, those grips. A lot of people complain about the angle. Other people complain about, it feels like you're holding a 2x4. There's no character to the grip. In fact, some people would complain that there's no character to the Glock whatsoever. That's probably a fair complaint. Glocks are so nondescript, generic. One of my friends who shoots a lot and works at a range calls them the McPistol of guns, and that's probably a fair description. However, Glocks are renowned for their reliability. They've been used by police departments and federal agencies since forever. I can see why people like them. They are very reliable. They're easy to use. They're all pretty much the same. So if you're moving from one Glock to the other, the functionality and the form is very, very similar. So it sort of makes sense in a state and federal capacity to use the Glock. But I didn't get as tight a group with the Glock, surprisingly. Now, it's still a good group, or at least an adequate group. Maybe I'll use the word adequate. But it's not quite as good as the SIG. But I will say that the grip on this, yeah, it's a little bit of a 2x4. Something else possibly is that the slide on the Glock is not as meaty as the slide on the SIG. That slide is just a little chunkier. I can feel the difference in the mass. I don't know exactly what the ounces difference is, but the mass on that slide is just a bit more. Maybe that kept the muzzle rise during the operation a little bit better under control. I don't know. Again, the triggers are somewhat different because there is no trigger safety on the P320, whereas you've got a little bit of a trigger safety on the Glock. You got that little flange of plastic there. Did that make the difference? Was that throwing me off? I don't know. Again, these are incredibly similar in terms of functionality. Striker fire, they're not double action, single action, like a few other pistols that have an external hammer where you would get a tough initial pull and then you would get ever after a much easier, lighter pull. That's not how these work. So the functionality is very, very similar, but I did get a somewhat better grip. Anyway, let's test it a second time. So we're going to go back and we're going to reverse the order of the guns. Each one we're going to shoot 2 magazines quickly as I can acquire, and then come back and talk about these a little bit more. So let's go back to the range. Okay, back from the second iteration. Similar results. Very, very interesting. Somewhat better grouping with the SIG. Not fantastically better, but somewhat better. Could it be the sights? I mean, these are just kind of standard 3 dots, almost identical to what my Smith & Wesson M&Ps have. Of course, the Glock kind of has that customary U with the dot in the middle. I mean, I don't personally, that doesn't bother me. It's not like I'm fantastically perturbed by that. I'm fine with that. But my results do suggest that slightly better grouping with the SIG. Again, could be the molded nature of the grip. Could be that the slide is a little chunkier. There's a little bit more mass to keep that muzzle from popping up so much. I try to exercise a decent grip. Nothing, I'm not strangling a snake, but I'm not limp wristing it either. Mostly I'm focusing on sight picture. With my eyes being as funky as they are, I really have to work hard on sight picture. So at 7 yards or even 10 yards, that target silhouette is getting awful fuzzy. I am focusing almost entirely on the sights themselves and then trying to make sure that those sights line up in the same place on the target paper every time, or at least as close as I can get to it every time. So at 7 yards for each of those 2 iterations, similar results. I personally am not super comfortable past about 10, just because the target paper starts to get really, really, really fuzzy with my eyes. Again, I'm corrected. I'm probably 20/30 on that shooting eye in the right eye. I wouldn't even try with the left eye right now. It's so bad. But right eye is dominant, right hand dominant. So I still manage okay. But yeah, there was some spread there. A little bit more difficult to tell if the SIG or the Glock performed better than, or worse than the other. Really not sure. Again, the trigger on each of these is a little bit different. The SIG I've heard described as a bit of a button, and I think that's somewhat accurate. It has a buttony kind of quality to it, whereas with the Glock, a little bit different quality. Again, you've got that little flangey trigger safety in there. Does that make a huge difference for the shooting? Maybe. Possibly, maybe. Again, probably. Really, I'm starting to think it might be just how it fits in the hand, and that the slide, I don't think, has quite as much mass as the P320. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe that's what's making all the difference. I'm sure if I shot this one repeatedly over 3 or 4 range trips, I could get the groups tighter. The P320 today just happened to be a little bit tighter, which I think is interesting, and also for me somewhat unexpected. I kind of figured they would both be right about the same, but they really weren't. Does that mean the SIG is better than the Glock? Well, you make up your own mind. I'm not going to tell you which one I think is better. I own both. The SIG is the only SIG I own so far. The Glock is the second Glock I own. I've got a Glock 21 as well. I'm an ecumenical guy when it comes to gun stuff. I don't really pick teams, and I don't go to war for brands. For me, the technology is fascinating, and the different aspects of the different, not only models, but the different brands and their brand philosophies, and how that influences how the guns are made and how they function. So to me, that's the fascination. It's not about picking a brand and becoming a zealot about it. But anyway, yeah, pretty fascinating, pretty different. Hopefully you have found this video somewhat illuminating, or at least enjoyable. Again, I'm not going to tell you one is definitely better than the other, because I don't know that one is better than the other. Although I will say, probably, if the SIG was a little bit more accurate today, this thing is a little bit easier in the waistband. I think the Glock 19 definitely, for a carry option, is a little bit more easy on the waist, so to say. So this one for range duty, definitely, quality weapon. Liked it, enjoyed it. It shot well. But for carry duty, this one probably is a little bit easier, especially for in waistband carry. So maybe that's the maybe that's the big advantage of that. In fact, with that reduced grip, again, it's striking a balance between a true carry compact and a full size. So it's going for something a little bit similar to like a 4.2-inch Smith & Wesson M&P, which I also have in 40 Smith & Wesson, although it's a somewhat bigger weapon than this. I just don't have it with me to show. So maybe that'll be another video for another time. All right, that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments, or if you want to see something else, or if you've got questions, or you just want to shout out. Thanks for watching. Talk to you later.